It began on a night that looked like any other, when the streets were heavy with silence and the lamps gave off a tired, yellow glow. The rain had fallen earlier and left the world shining wet, like it had been freshly painted. A man walked quickly through that half-lit street, his shoes slapping against the uneven pavement. His name was Rafik, a man known in whispers as someone who always found a way around the rules, a survivor in a city that swallowed the honest whole. To most, he was a cheat, a trickster, a man who lived by shortcuts. But that night, the very trick he carried in his back pocket, the one people scorned, would become the reason a life did not end. He had spent the evening in a cafe, the kind that never closed, where the tea was watery and the chairs wobbled but nobody asked too many questions. He had been running a little scheme, his classic cheat, as he called it, the one he'd used so often it was second nature. With a smile and a forged paper in his pocket, he could pass himself off as a doctor, a clerk, a messenger. Tonight it was a doctor. He had the jacket, the stethoscope, the papers that looked official enough to fool most people. He wasn't saving the world with it, not really. Usually, it was just about free meals, a place to sleep, or slipping out of a difficult situation without a scratch. But as he turned a corner, he heard the noise that made him stop, the kind of sound that cracks through the quiet like broken glass. A woman's scream. It wasn't distant. It was close, trembling with panic. He felt something stir in him, that instinct that always weighed the risk against the gain. Normally, he might have kept walking, letting the night bury the noise. But something in that cry had urgency, the kind that doesn't let you keep moving. Against his better judgment, he ran. At the end of the alley, under the dripping fire escape, he found a young boy collapsed on the ground, his mother clutching him, shaking him, crying his name. The child's lips were pale, his small chest struggling for breath, the air catching like a broken bellows. The mother looked up with wild eyes, desperate, lost. "Please," she begged the darkness, not even seeing him yet. "Somebody, help my son." And then her eyes found Rafik. For a second, he thought she saw right through him, that she would know he was no doctor, only a fraud with a pocket full of lies. But the stethoscope around his neck caught the light, and in her eyes bloomed a kind of hope that terrified him. "Doctor," she cried. "Please save him." He froze, the rain dripping down his hair, his heart hammering as if it too couldn't breathe. He wanted to tell her the truth, to say he wasn't who she thought he was. But the boy's shallow gasps, the color fading from his face, the mother's trembling hands, all of it demanded something more than honesty. His classic cheat, the trick that had carried him through years of selfish survival, was now the only thing standing between life and death. He knelt down, hands shaking as he pressed his ear to the boy's chest. He had no training, no medical knowledge beyond what he had picked up from movies, from books left lying around. But he remembered one thing, a memory of his younger brother who had once nearly drowned, how the village elder had pressed breath into him, pounding rhythm against his chest until his lungs found air again. It wasn't science, not exactly, but it was something. "Step back," Rafik ordered, his voice louder than he meant it to be, strong enough to sound like authority. The mother obeyed instantly, hope and fear swirling in her eyes. He placed his hands over the boy's small chest and pushed, counting under his breath, then leaned down to breathe air into his lungs. Once, twice, 3 times. For a moment, nothing. The boy lay still, his body fragile as glass. Panic clawed at Rafik's insides. He pushed again, harder this time, willing the child's heart to remember its rhythm. Then a shudder. A cough. A gasp of air, so sharp it cut through the night. The boy's chest rose, shaky but real, and his eyes fluttered open. The mother let out a sob, so heavy it nearly collapsed her. She gathered her son in her arms, kissing his damp forehead, crying words of gratitude that spilled like a river. Rafik sat back on his heels, his own breath ragged, sweat and rain mixing on his skin. His hands still trembled, but inside him was a silence he had never known before, a silence that felt like peace. For once, his lie had not fed his stomach or padded his pockets. It had kept a child alive. The mother clutched his hand, tears shining on her face. "You saved him, doctor." You saved my boy." He wanted to tell her the truth, to strip away the false title and give her only the reality of who he was. But he didn't. Not then. He only nodded, letting her believe, because in that moment the truth mattered less than the miracle she thought she had witnessed. When he finally walked away, the night felt different. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were breaking, letting through slivers of a bruised moon. For years, he had been called a cheat, and rightly so. But that night, his cheat had not been for himself. It had saved a life. And for the first time, Rafik wondered if a man could be more than what the world had always called him. Rafik had never been born with the kind of chances other men carried like armor. His life, from the beginning, had been a crooked path carved through hunger, loss, and streets that gave nothing for free. His father had been a laborer, the kind who broke his back on construction sites until the day he didn't come home, buried beneath a wall that collapsed before his shift was done. His mother followed soon after, not from accident but from sickness that ate her from the inside, leaving Rafik, barely 12, with a little brother to feed and no way to do it. It was then that he learned the art of bending truth into something useful. He discovered how easily papers could be faked with ink stolen from a clerk's desk, how a confident tone could be mistaken for authority, how a quick hand and quicker tongue could make a policeman look the other way. People called him a cheat, and he wore the word like a coat that shielded him from the cold. What else was he supposed to do? Work didn't come for boys like him, and honesty had no place in alleys where the weak starved first. As he grew, his tricks sharpened. He could slip into a meal hall by claiming to be on the guest list. He could bluff his way past guards with counterfeit stamps. Once, in desperation, he had posed as a medical orderly to get free medicine for his dying brother. The boy hadn't survived, but the trick had worked well enough to burn itself into Rafik's mind. People trusted a man in a white coat more than they trusted the truth. His brother's death hardened him further, making him believe that fate itself had no mercy and that only cunning could keep a man alive. Years passed, and Rafik became a shadow drifting between names, jobs, and disguises. To some he was a driver, to others a clerk, and sometimes, when he needed to open doors that otherwise stayed shut, he became the doctor. He had perfected the classic cheat, the same stethoscope, the same borrowed air of confidence, the same quiet deception. It had kept him alive in situations where honesty would have killed him, but never had it done more than serve his own survival. That was why, when the night came and he saw the boy on the ground, the moment struck him with a force he couldn't explain. The scream had cut through the shell he had built around himself, slicing into the part of him that still remembered holding his little brother as his life faded away. For a second, the alley blurred, and all he could see was that memory, that boy who never got the air he needed. This time, he would not watch another child fade into silence. When the boy gasped back to life under his hands, Rafik felt something inside him fracture and heal at once. The mother's gratitude pressed heavy on him, and though he kept his secret, it gnawed at him in a way no lie ever had. He had spent his life cheating fate for his own sake, but this time, the cheat had been for someone else. He walked for hours that night after leaving them, aimless, his steps echoing through streets that had once felt like a cage, but now seemed filled with possibility. He thought of his brother, of how he had failed him, and for the first time in years he whispered aloud, into the emptiness of the night, "I'm sorry." The words didn't change the past, but they loosened the weight on his chest. Perhaps fate had opened that side door not just for him, but for someone else too. Perhaps a man could stumble through lies and tricks his whole life, and still, in a single moment, discover something real. And so the cheat that had made him a fugitive, a trickster, a man without roots or name, had finally done something greater. It had saved a life. And in saving that life, it had begun to save him too.